Guys, welcome to Somlo in the Burlington Arcade. I'm here with my dear friend Dan of Somlo, and we are discussing 4 iconic Speedmasters from Omega. And I thought it was only right that the MoonSwatch getting the love it's had last year in 2022 and this year in 23 already, we can see it's kicking off again, that we actually bring it to the same table as some of the most important Speedmasters ever made. And just getting an insight from Dan to what these references mean to collectors, what the key elements to look for are, why they're important. So Dan, let's dive in. Chronologically, we've got 3 references here from the traditional Omega line. Tell us what we've got, why each are important and what we should look for.
Okay, well, so if we go chronologically.
Yep.
We've got the first one here, and this is the first reference of Speedmaster. So it's a 2915. This is a -2. Made in 1958, this one was. And so a year after the Speedmaster was first launched. And when you first look at it, and people who are familiar with modern Speedmasters, for example, may not even necessarily think it is one, because there are quite a few sort of design differences. You've got the broad arrow hands, which obviously got phased out towards, in the 60s. And but then people who are collectors of Omega will well known that because it features in a lot of current Omega watches.
And also the Ranchero, no? Traditionally.
And the Ranchero, yeah.
One of my favourite references, yeah. You've seen in the last couple of years interest in these very early models increasing.
Definitely.
Yeah. Especially in good condition.
Yeah, I mean the reputation of Omega and the Speedmaster in general has really gone up in the past few years.
Without naming names of comparative brands out there, we talked about it privately the other day about some of the early references from that brand maybe not being of the best quality actually when they first came out of this era.
No.
Whereas the comparison from Omega is such that they were actually of very good quality when they first came out.
Exactly.
And what are you looking for here from a buyer perspective? We've got matching loom on the hands and the dial, which means that it's all right.
Yeah.
You've got original sub-seconds hands as well. So what are the key elements here people should be looking for?
Generally with these, it's there are so few around and so few people have experience even just handling them that it's very difficult sometimes to know what is correct. The steel bezel was famously very, very fragile. It broke off a lot of the time. It was replaced as service. You'll find later bezels on these all the time, or just missing bezels.
Yep.
And finding ones which look correct or appropriate for the era is near enough impossible. I mean, it's a flimsy, tiny, thin piece of steel.
What are we talking rough numbers of production for this particular model?
As far as the experts generally sort of gauge it, it's between, well, it's around about 1,000 for each sub-reference, so 3,000 to 4,000 in total.
Okay, wow. For a brand of their size, people's psyche of understanding that is something that very, very few made.
Smaller than most of the limited.
Right, second model. We've got a bit of chocolate love going on here.
Yeah, so this one, I really love this watch because this is a reference 2998, so it's the second sort of generation of Speedmaster. And it's had a few design sort of advances, so the bezels were black rather than being steel. It was like a more well-known Speedmaster black bezel.
In this instance though, it's patinaed to match the dial, which is this brownie.
Nicely, yeah. Yeah,
beautiful.
It's, I mean the 2998 is kind of a collector's paradise because there are about 8 different sub-references made within 3 years.
Wow.
And all of them have their own little differences and little eccentricities, and again, production of about 1,000 of each sub-reference.
What sub-reference is this, sorry?
So this is a -1.
Okay.
So it's the very first of the 2998.
And what are you looking at there to know that that's a -1?
So the bezel will be a base 1000 black bezel, which they only had on the last 2915s and the first 2998s.
Okay.
Things like the hands would have these sort of leaf pattern sub-hands. The dial is actually closer to a 2915 dial as the later dials, so there are slight differences in the length of the lines, things like that. But what I love about this particular watch is how honest it is. It's had a bit of work done in its life. I mean, the case has been polished at some point, as you'd expect with the tool watch from the well, I think this one's 1959. And yeah, it's just kind of been left to its own devices. I mean, the dial's gone brown, but there are little bits where it's missing. Hands are sort of missing a bit of loom, but it's all of the old parts.
This is one for the purist.
Exactly.
And it's worth noting that, of course, the moon landing in '69, these were all pre-MoonWatch references. So people in their minds looking at Omega for the first time get caught up in the connection to the moon landing, but these are pre-moon.
Yeah.
Third watch we've got here.
So this one is my own personal watch.
Christ, you're not preparing that one to sell, are you? Hey, can't put that on the table. What are we asking for that one?
No, but this, I mean, it's an example of ones that we've had similar versions of, and we always try and get them if we can. So this is, I like to call it the MoonWatch, because this is the reference that Buzz Aldrin would have been wearing when he landed on the moon. It's 105012, and it's the CV case, which is sort of an unusual sub-reference with a slightly different case profile than the rest of them.
Is that the thickness we're referring to here on the lugs, for example?
Thickness, and you see those facets on all the corners,
edges,
just slightly,
quite flared.
Line. And that was when they used a different case manufacturer for the first few months of the production, called Central Black, rather than Huguenot Bray. And so you can tell them they all had those facets. And most of the time, you know, over the years, people polishing these watches up would have not had a clue that was meant to be there. They would have just polished it off and left it.
So you've seen these cases come back, but been manipulated through service.
Exactly.
In a way that almost makes them unrecognisable.
Yeah.
God, that's interesting. And of course, here we've got a view into the case back.
Yeah. So I have personalised this one slightly. Obviously, I've got all of the old parts, but it's such a beautiful movement, and I found an old sort of spare see-through case back.
Okay.
You know, forcing a bracelet, because again, the old flat link bracelets you can see on these ones are a little lovely, but very fragile.
Yeah. Very, very, very nice. Price point for these three. Give us a quick overview of what we're talking, because these really are collector watches.
So the 2915, I mean, there is a huge range, just depending on how original they are, what condition, just how aesthetically pleasing they are, and even then, because of the debates over bezels and things like that, it can be hugely subjective. So I'd say it could be, this one in particular is probably around about 150,000.
Okay.
But they can be anywhere from 80 to, well, we've seen one go for 2 million.
We talked about that privately yesterday, at Sworded Auction.
But you know, very easily 100, 200,000.
Wow, okay,
fine. Depends on the watch.
Okay.
2998s, again, huge range, anything from sort of 30s, 40,000s. For early ones like this can go up to 90, 100,000, especially with the topical dials. But then the 321, the sort of last of the 321 sort of era, when you get the more modern asymmetric style cases and things, they can be anywhere from 12, 15, up to 20,000 for the really pristine ones.
It strikes me as they might be an interesting gateway for someone who wants a serious watch, who's prepared to pay serious money, but maybe more approachable as an early stage collector, with the nuance of the case and detail.
Absolutely. You can even go down to sort of the 861, so the first of the 861 new movements, and coming out in sort of late 68, 69, and you can find a sort of arguably a pre-moon watch with no reference to the moon landing on the back, still just, you know, Speedmaster, with an 861 movement in it, and then they're going to be sort of less than £10,000, and you've still got a very early, very desirable watch.
Guys, can we just make a comment that if you've heard bells going off in the background or cleaners going by, that's because we're actually in the store here, just to make that clear. I'm not sure if you're able to hear it or not, but finally, Dan, okay, that's fantastic. Finally, we're now moving on to a more modern incarnation of the Speedmaster, one that we have, for exhibition purposes only, have worked with you on, is that this watch has actually gone to the moon. It's the MoonSwatch, which of course launched last year. This is the moon incarnation. We don't need to rehash, I mean, we could talk for hours on the ins and outs of what happened, whether it was planned, the success that took place last year for Omega and for Swatch, or what the outcomes have been. But the truth of it is, we felt, and this was partly tongue-in-cheek, but partly because we are watch geeks at our heart, we thought that the MoonSwatch had to go to space. And so this was and is the first MoonSwatch in space. And you know that because you can see the engraving on the case back, FIPO, for exhibition purposes only, 001. And the footage is online, you can see it on the website, and we've now got it in the window of Somlo. That is until the end of February, and we have the ballot taking place on the website at the moment, where people can buy, and this was a key element of the process, Dan, which we've talked about, was the technical element, we've broken up the descent of this watch. So it went to over 110,000 feet, and we've broken the descent into segment video clips. So there's 960 of those. They're made up in NFTs, and there's a real reason we wanted people to be able to own a part of the history, and that's why we went the NFT route. And we've sold a lot of them already, but people wanted to see the watch, and now it's in the window at Somlo. Crucially, it's for exhibition purposes only, so it is not something that Dan or his team are going to get out the window to show anyone, but it's in the window for people to see. So just give us a quick overview, because it's still fairly fresh, given that it's only a few months old now.
Absolutely.
How have people responded to this watch?
I mean, it's a watch that's, without sort of any shade of a doubt, the biggest watch to be released in recent memory. I mean, nothing has made such a stir as this in terms of the fact that it's actually transcended the watch community. A watch like this all of a sudden brings so much attention to Omega, to the Speedmaster. It sort of presents an alternative to many things that people would just automatically associate with, oh, I want to buy a nice watch. But in doing that, it brings a lot of attention to what the Speedmaster actually did and why it was such an achievement for a watch company, for a watch in itself, and why it has such a sort of die-hard core of collectors.
One thing I will say is that I remember getting because this is a bio-ceramic material that Swatch pioneered, and the early watches, which were 2-3 years ago, which I saw, were just hideous, just these massive, horrid versions of what the material would then go on to be in the MoonSwatch. So to me, it's still, I mean, it still looks punchy. I mean, it's got a visual DNA to it that no other watch has, in the sense that it has a toy-like quality to it. You almost want to touch it. It looks tactile, and it's got a, and even to this day, they're actually quite tricky to get hold of. You know, I still don't believe that the brands recognised the potency of what it could and what it did become. No doubt one of the most important watch stories of the decade. There you have it, folks. If you want to come and see the first MoonSwatch in space, feel free to come by and have a look through the window at Somlo. It's also important to note that we're raising money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, so 20% of any profits that come through the sale of the raffle tickets, the NFTs for this project, will go to Make-A-Wish Foundation. And yeah, as always, please do comment below, let us know what your thoughts are. No doubt you want to hear more from Dan, and you want to hear more about these collectible Speedmasters, so please let us know what you'd like us to film next, and we'll do it. So as always, thank you again, and go well.